The year is 1939. The world watches in paralyzed horror as the German war machine rolls across the Polish border. Columns of panzer tanks stretch for miles, the Luftwaffe darkens the sky, and the Wehrmacht moves with a mechanized precision that suggests infinite resources and limitless wealth. You probably believe that this military-industrial complex was funded by the ruthless plunder of conquered nations or simple brute force tyranny. In 1933, just 6 years prior, Germany was not a superpower. It was an economic corpse. The treasury was empty, foreign credit was non-existent, and the currency was so fragile that the memory of wheelbarrows full of worthless marks still haunted the streets. So how does a bankrupt nation buy the world's most expensive army without triggering hyperinflation or alerting the international community? But here is what is fascinating. They didn't use real money. They used a financial illusion so complex, so daring, and so fragile that it functioned like a national Ponzi scheme. Let me show you how the Third Reich built a superpower on a foundation of paper and lies. You're watching The Historical Crucible, where strategy meets consequence. If you value this depth of analysis, subscribing ensures you don't miss the next investigation. To understand the magnitude of this gamble, we must stand in the ruins of the German economy in January 1933. The atmosphere in Berlin is not one of triumph, but of suffocation. The Great Depression has hollowed out the industrial heartland. 6 million men are unemployed, standing in breadlines that snake around city blocks, their eyes hollow with the kind of despair that breeds radicalism. The factories are silent, the shipyards are rusting. The Weimar Republic has collapsed under the weight of its own incompetence and the crushing reparations demanded by the Treaty of Versailles. When Adolf Hitler enters the Reich Chancellery, he inherits a ledger that is bleeding red ink. The state is effectively insolvent. Yet his first private move is not to feed the hungry or restart the civilian economy. Within days of taking power, he summons the commanders of the Army and Navy to a secret dinner at the residence of General Hammerstein Eckward. In this smoke-filled room, away from the microphones and the cheering crowds, he lays out his true directive: complete, total rearmament. He demands the creation of a military force capable of conquering Europe, and he demands it be ready in 4 years.
The generals are stunned. They look at the numbers. The cost of such an expansion is estimated at tens of billions of Reichsmarks. Germany's total tax revenue is a fraction of that. Furthermore, the Treaty of Versailles strictly limits the German military to a token force of 100,000 men, with no air force, no submarines, and no heavy armor. International inspectors are watching. The French are watching. If Germany starts printing money to build tanks, the currency will collapse again, plunging the nation back into the hyperinflationary nightmare of 1923, a trauma so deep in the German psyche that it is feared more than war itself. If they borrow openly, the Allies will intervene before the 1st Panzer rolls off the assembly line. This is the dictator's paradox. He has the will, he has the manpower, but he lacks the capital. By all conventional economic laws, the rearmament of Germany is impossible. It is a mathematical dead end. Hitler needs a miracle. He needs someone who can bypass the laws of economics, someone who can create value out of thin air without alerting the global markets. He does not turn to a general or an ideologue for this. He turns to a man who represents the old guard, a man of stiff collars and supreme arrogance, Hjalmar Schacht. Schacht is not a street-fighting Nazi. He is a brilliant, enigmatic technocrat, a former president of the Reichsbank who is credited with saving the currency a decade earlier. He views the Nazis with a mix of utility and disdain, seeing them as a crude instrument to restore German greatness. But he accepts the challenge because he believes he is the smartest man in the room. Hitler gives him the order: find the money, hide the debt, and do not crash the currency. Schacht's solution is a masterclass in financial obfuscation. He knows the government cannot issue bonds to pay for tanks, the public has no money to lend, and foreign markets are closed to Germany. He also knows the Reichsbank cannot simply print money to pay arms manufacturers like Krupp and Siemens, as that would trigger immediate inflation. So Schacht invents a ghost. He creates a shadow currency that exists only to facilitate war. He devises a dummy corporation, a shell company with no employees, no products, and no offices. It is called the Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, or the Society for Metallurgical Research. The acronym is Mefo. This company is a fiction, a legal hallucination designed to circumvent the banking system. The plan is deviously simple, yet incredibly risky. The German government will not pay defense contractors in Reichsmarks. Instead, they will pay them in Mefo bills, promissory notes issued by this ghost company, guaranteed by the state, but hidden from the public budget.
It works like this. Krupp builds a tank. The government tells Krupp to bill Mefo. Mefo pays Krupp with a bill of exchange, essentially an IOU, that promises payment in 6 months with 4% interest. Krupp can then take this bill to any German bank and trade it for cash or hold it as an investment. The banks are ordered to accept them. The books are cooked. On paper, the government has spent nothing. The debt does not appear in the national budget. It is hidden in the internal ledgers of a shell company that technically doesn't exist. Schacht has essentially created a parallel monetary system. He is printing money, but because it is disguised as commercial paper between private companies, it doesn't trigger the inflation alarms. It is a silent injection of liquidity. The factories begin to roar to life. Smoke rises from the stacks in the Ruhr Valley. Men are called back to work, not realizing their wages are being funded by a ghost. But there is a catch. There is always a catch. A Mefo kill is debt. It is a promise to pay later. Schacht is betting that the military conquests funded by these bills will eventually loot enough wealth from Europe to pay them back. It is a delay tactic on a continental scale. As 1934 bleeds into 1935, the scale of the operation expands terrifyingly. The Mefo bills are circulating in the billions. The rearmament is accelerating faster than anyone predicted. But this creates a new, dangerous pressure. This shadow economy relies entirely on secrecy. If the French or the British discover the sheer volume of Mefo bills, they will know Germany is preparing for total war. If the German public realizes their economic miracle is built on unpayable debt, confidence will shatter. Schacht is juggling dynamite, and Hitler keeps demanding more speed. The friction between the banker's reality and the dictator's fantasy begins to spark. This financial house of cards is holding up the weight of 1,000,000 tons of steel, but the foundation is cracking. That crack in the foundation manifests not as a number on a ledger, but as a shortage of physical reality. By 1935, the illusion of infinite money collides with the finite nature of raw materials. You can print Reichsmarks until the presses smoke, but you cannot print iron ore. You cannot print rubber. You cannot print oil. Germany is resource poor. To build the tanks Hitler envisions, the Reich needs to import massive quantities of foreign materials. But to import, they need foreign currency, dollars, pounds, gold, and Germany has none. The reserves are empty. This triggers the first major internal crisis of the Third Reich's economy, the dilemma of guns versus butter. The German public, still traumatized by the starvation blockades of the Great War, expects the economic recovery to bring food, clothing, and comfort. They want butter. Hitler, obsessed with his timeline for conquest, wants guns. Logic dictates you cannot have both when your pockets are empty. A normal nation would choose butter to maintain stability. A nation preparing for defense might choose guns and ask for sacrifice. Hitler demands both. He refuses to introduce rationing, fearing it would damage his popularity. Yet he demands the assembly lines run 24 hours a day. Schacht, ever the technocrat, attempts to solve this impossible equation with a system of Byzantine complexity known as the New Plan. If Germany has no cash to buy cotton from the United States or wool from Britain, they will stop using cash altogether. Schacht reverts a modern industrial economy back to medieval barter. He orchestrates bilateral trade agreements with the Balkans and South America. Germany ships aspirin, formonicas, and machinery to Brazil. Brazil ships coffee and cotton to Germany. No currency changes hands. It is a desperate, chaotic shuffling of goods designed to bypass the global financial system entirely. But even this economic alchemy has a limit. By 1936, the military's appetite has grown too large for bartering harmonicas. The Wehrmacht is consuming steel and fuel at a rate that threatens to collapse the civilian economy entirely. Schacht, the architect of the miracle, looks at the data and sees the cliff edge. He walks into the chancellery and tells Hitler the truth. The pace is unsustainable. To avoid bankruptcy, rearmament must slow down. We need to export more and build weapons less. It is a moment of absolute clarity. It is the moment a rational actor pulls back from the brink. If you are following this analysis to understand the specific mechanics of how dictatorships override economic reality,
This is the pivotal divergence point, where logic is abandoned for ideology. Hitler rejects Schacht's-Morming. He views economics not as a set of laws, but as a question of will. If the money doesn't exist, it must be taken. If the resources aren't there, they must be synthesized. Hitler responds to the crisis by writing a secret memorandum in August 1936. It is a document of pure, unadulterated aggression. He explicitly states that a war with the Soviet Union is inevitable. He sets a hard deadline. The German army must be operational within 4 years. The German economy must be fit for war within 4 years. To enforce this, he sidelines the brilliant, cautious Schacht and appoints a new economic czar, Hermann Göring.
Göring is not a banker. He is not an economist. He is a World War I fighter ace, a morphine addict, and a sycophant who knows nothing about balance sheets. His appointment signals the end of expert control and the beginning of command economy madness. Göring introduces the 4-year plan. The goal is autarky, total self-sufficiency. If Germany cannot buy oil, they will invent synthetic fuel from coal. If they cannot buy rubber, they will synthesize it in chemical plants. It is a massive, incredibly expensive gamble to make Germany immune to blockade. The cost of the 4-year plan is astronomical. Producing synthetic oil costs 10 times more than buying it from Texas or the Middle East. It drains labor, capital, and steel away from the civilian sector. The national debt balloons into the stratosphere. But under Göring, nobody is allowed to look at the ledger. The only metric that matters is the output of the armaments factories. This shift changes the fundamental nature of the German state. From 1936 onward, the economy is no longer designed to sustain the nation. It is a machine designed to consume itself to fuel the military. It becomes a predatory entity. Schacht's Mefo bills were a mortgage on future prosperity, but Göring's 4-year plan is a mortgage on survival itself. The logic becomes circular and terrifying. The economy is being ruined to build an army, so the army must be used to conquer new territories to save the economy. They are burning the furniture to heat the house, and the fire is getting hungry. The shortage of foreign currency doesn't go away, it gets worse. By late 1937, the Reich is running on fumes. The synthetic plants aren't producing enough. The steel quotas are being missed. The generals are demanding more copper, more lead, more rubber. The economic miracle is revealed to be a ticking time bomb. The leadership knows that if they stop rearming, unemployment returns and the regime collapses. If they continue rearming, they go bankrupt. There is only one escape route left. If Germany cannot pay for what it needs, it must prepare to steal it. This shift from internal restructuring to external predation begins in the shadows of the Reich Chancellery. On November 5, 1937, Hitler convenes a secret meeting with his top military and foreign policy advisors. This event, recorded in the Hossbach Memorandum, is the moment the mask slips. For years, the regime has preached self-sufficiency, or autarky. But in this room, away from the propaganda microphones, Hitler admits a devastating truth. Autarky has failed. The German soil cannot produce enough food or raw materials to sustain the standard of living and the massive rearmament simultaneously.
He lays out the grim calculus. The economy is overheating. The reserves are gone. The only way to sustain the Reich is to seize resources from the neighbors. The decision to go to war is no longer just an ideological ambition. It has become an economic necessity to prevent domestic collapse. The vampire economy has run out of its own blood. It must now feed on others. The first target is chosen not just for its German-speaking population, but for its bank vaults. In March 1938, the Wehrmacht crosses the border into Austria. The world watches the Anschluss as a political union, a triumphant homecoming for Hitler. But behind the cheering crowds and the waving flags, a far more clinical operation is underway. While the soldiers secure the streets, agents of the Reichsbank secure the financial institutions. This is a hostile takeover in the most literal sense. At the moment of the invasion, the Austrian National Bank holds significantly more gold and foreign currency reserves than the German Reichsbank. Germany is effectively bankrupt. Austria is solvent. Within days, the Austrian reserves are transferred to Berlin. It is a massive injection of hard currency, over 780 million Reichsmarks in gold and foreign exchange assets. This plunder instantly stabilizes the German deficit. It pays for the overdue bills. It allows the factories to buy more rubber and copper from the global market. The invasion of Austria essentially bails out the Nazi economy for another year. If uncovering these hidden economic mechanics of the war deepens your understanding of history, subscribing ensures you don't miss the next analysis of how power actually operates. But the relief is temporary. The Nazi war machine is an engine of incredible inefficiency. It burns through the stolen Austrian capital at a terrifying rate. The loot from Vienna acts like a shot of adrenaline. It provides a burst of energy, but it doesn't cure the underlying disease. The structural deficit remains. By the summer of 1938, the crisis returns, more acute than before. The hunger for steel and oil grows as the army expands. The regime looks for the next meal. They turn their eyes to Czechoslovakia. The Sudetenland crisis is publicly framed around the rights of ethnic Germans, a diplomatic theater played out for the British and French. But economically, the target is strategic industrial capacity. The Sudetenland contains the mountain fortifications that defend the Czech nation, but more importantly, stripping away these borderlands leaves the Czech industrial heartland exposed.
When Hitler eventually occupies the rest of Czechoslovakia in March 1939, the economic motive is blatant. The prize is the Škoda Works, one of the largest arms manufacturers in Europe. In a single stroke, Germany acquires a production capacity that rivals its own entire domestic output. They seize thousands of heavy guns, millions of rounds of ammunition, and enough tanks to outfit entire panzer divisions. They didn't have to build these weapons. They didn't have to pay for the steel or the labor. They simply took them. Yet even this massive infusion of stolen capital and hardware creates a paradox. Every conquest expands the army, and a larger army requires even more resources to maintain. It is a self-perpetuating cycle of escalation. To secure the resources to maintain the current military, they need a larger military to conquer more territory. Hjalmar Schacht, the architect of the Mefo bills, and the financial wizard who kept the illusion alive, sees the writing on the wall. He confronts Hitler, warning that this reckless expenditure is leading to hyperinflation and ruin. He demands a return to fiscal sanity. But Hitler is done with sanity. He is done with accountants telling him what he cannot afford. In January 1939, Schacht is dismissed from the presidency of the Reichsbank. With the technocrat gone, the last guardrail is removed. The economy is now fully under the control of Hermann Göring and the ideologues. They do not care about balance sheets. They care about output quotas. They begin printing money to cover the deficits, gambling everything on the belief that final victory will pay the debts. The looting of Austria and Czechoslovakia has bought them time, but it hasn't bought them salvation. The gold is spent. The raw materials are being processed into munitions that generate no economic return. The clock is ticking louder than ever. By the summer of 1939, the German economy is facing a terminal deadline. They have exhausted every trick, every loan, and every peaceful conquest. There is nowhere left to steal from without triggering a world war. The Nazi leadership looks at the map and sees only one direction left to go: east. Poland is not merely a strategic objective, it is a resource cache required to keep the ledger balance for just a few more months. The invasion on September 1, 1939, marks the moment the Nazi economic miracle transforms from a domestic Ponzi scheme into a continental vampire economy. The regime has realized that the only way to pay for the rearmament of the past is to plunder the future of its neighbors. When the Wehrmacht crosses the border, they are followed closely by economic extraction teams, bureaucrats armed not with rifles, but with manifests and seizure orders. They are there to capture the Polish gold reserves, industrial machinery, and raw materials to feed the insatiable hunger of the German war machine.
For a brief moment, the gamble appears to pay off. The rapid victories in the West in 1940, the fall of France, the Netherlands, and Belgium provide a massive infusion of looted capital. The regime imposes staggering occupation costs on the conquered nations. France alone is forced to pay 20 million Reichsmarks every single day to cover the cost of being occupied. This is organized theft on an industrial scale. The German soldier sends home packages of coffee, silk, and luxury goods from Paris, creating an illusion of prosperity back in Berlin. The German public, shielded from the realities of the deficit by strict price controls and rationing, believes the system is working. They see the spoils of war and assume the economy is robust. In reality, the Reich is simply cannibalizing Europe to pay the interest on its own bad debts. If this forensic analysis of the war's economic underpinnings is reshaping how you view the conflict, a like helps these deep dives reach a broader audience of history enthusiasts. However, a predatory economy has a fatal flaw.
It requires constant expansion to survive. Once the loot from France is absorbed, the hunger returns, sharper than before. The captured assets are quickly burned through in the production of munitions that are fired away and destroyed. An artillery shell has no economic return on investment. Once it explodes, that capital is gone forever. By 1941, the Nazi leadership faces the same dilemma they faced in 1939. They are running out of oil, grain, and labor. The logic of the deficit dictates their next move. They must invade the Soviet Union, not just for ideological Lebensraum, but because the planners in Berlin have calculated that without the grain of Ukraine and the oil of the Caucasus, the German economy will collapse within months. Operation Barbarossa is the ultimate double-or-nothing bet. Hitler and his economic advisors operate under the delusion that the Soviet state will crumble in weeks, allowing them to seize vast resources intact. Instead, they find themselves in a war of attrition they cannot afford. The Soviet scorched earth policy means there is no harvest to steal, and the oil wells are sabotaged. The economic assumptions underpinning the invasion evaporate. Now, the debt comes due in blood. The regime turns to its darkest economic innovation, slave labor. Millions of people are deported to the Reich to work in factories, a desperate attempt to substitute capital with coerced human misery. It is the final, brutal efficiency of a system that views human beings merely as units of production to be.
By 1944, the illusion is shattered. The cities of the Ruhr are reduced to rubble by Allied bombing, destroying the very industrial capacity Hitler mortgaged the nation to build. The Reichsmark is effectively worthless, kept in circulation only by the terror of the Gestapo. The complex web of Mefo bills, hidden deficits, and creative accounting that Hjalmar Schacht spun a decade earlier unravels completely. The economic miracle is revealed to be nothing more than a deferred catastrophe. When the end finally comes in May 1945, the German economy does not just go into recession, it ceases to exist. The currency is replaced by American cigarettes. The factories are twisted metal. The nation is bankrupt, morally and financially. The story of how Hitler funded his war is not a story of genius, it is a story of fraud. It was a system built on the premise that if you move fast enough, you can outrun the consequences of your own insolvency. But the laws of economics, like the laws of gravity, are patient. Eventually, the bill always comes due. The devastation of 1945 was not an unfortunate side effect of the war. It was the inevitable mathematical conclusion of 1933. The Nazis did not fix the German economy. They simply stole the future, spent it all at once, and left the world to pay the price.